I never thought I'd be the kind of person to stand by and watch my neighbor freeze. But when Brenda Whitmore blocked my oil delivery access in the middle of a Pennsylvania winter, something inside me just switched off. The whole mess started on a Tuesday morning in early January, when I woke up to my phone buzzing with a text from Miller's Oil Company. They'd been my heating oil supplier for the 3 years since I bought my property at 247 Oak Ridge Lane in Chester Springs, a quiet subdivision about 40 minutes northwest of Philadelphia. The text was simple and infuriating. Unable to complete delivery due to HOA barrier. Please contact association to resolve access issue. I stood in my kitchen, coffee mug halfway to my lips, staring at those words like they were written in a foreign language. What barrier? I'd lived here long enough to know that oil deliveries came twice a month during winter, always using the service road that ran behind our row of properties. It was a shared easement specifically designed for utility access, trash collection, and deliveries too large for the narrow front driveways. I pulled on my boots and coat, stepping out into the bitter morning air. The temperature gauge on my back porch read 18 degrees, and the weather forecast I'd checked earlier predicted it would only get colder. Some meteorologist on Channel 6 had been going on about a polar vortex pushing down from Canada, bringing record-breaking low temperatures to the mid-Atlantic states. Perfect timing. Walking around to the back of my property, I immediately saw the problem. Someone had installed a heavy-duty chain-link gate across the service road, complete with a shiny new padlock and a laminated sign that read, HOA property, no unauthorized vehicles beyond this point. I pulled out my phone and called Miller's Oil. The dispatcher, a woman named Carol who I'd spoken to dozens of times, answered on the second ring. Hey Carol, it's Quincy Zimmerman. I got your text about the barrier. Oh, Mr. Zimmerman, yes. Our driver got there at 6 this morning like usual, but he couldn't get his truck through. There's a locked gate now. He tried calling the number on the sign, but no one answered. What number? Hold on. I heard papers rustling. It's listed as the HOA president's emergency line. My jaw tightened. Brenda Whitmore, the self-appointed empress of Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I say self-appointed because she'd basically bullied her way into the position 2 years ago when the previous president, a reasonable retired accountant named Tom, moved to Florida to escape both the cold and Brenda's constant complaints. Don't worry about it, Carol. I'll handle this and call you back. Just so you know, you're getting pretty low. According to our records, you're probably down to about a quarter tank. In this cold, that'll last maybe 4 or 5 days if you're conservative with your thermostat. Understood. I'll get it sorted. I hung up and immediately dialed Brenda's number, which I unfortunately had saved from previous HOA disputes. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Quincy, good morning. What can I do for you? You can tell me why there's a gate blocking the service road and why my oil delivery couldn't get through this morning. Oh, that. She didn't even pretend to sound apologetic. The HOA board held an emergency meeting last week. We've had concerns about unauthorized vehicles using the service road. Someone reported seeing a strange van back there at odd hours. For security purposes, we've implemented a controlled access system. Brenda, that's an easement road. You can't just block access to it. I have a legal right to use it for deliveries and services. The HOA has a responsibility to maintain safety and security for all residents. If you need to schedule a delivery, you simply need to submit a written request at least 5 business days in advance. The board will review it, and if approved, will provide temporary access during the specified time window. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice level. 5 business days. Brenda, I need oil now. It's 18 degrees outside and supposed to drop into the single digits by the weekend. Well, perhaps you should have been more proactive about monitoring your tank levels. And honestly, Quincy, this could have been avoided if you'd attended the HOA meeting. All residents were notified via email. I pulled my phone away from my ear and checked my email. Sure enough, buried in my spam folder was a message from 10 days ago with the subject line, "Mandatory HOA meeting January 3rd, 7 p.m. I'd never seen it, and even if I had, I'd been visiting my brother in Pittsburgh that week. I didn't get the email, Brenda. It went to spam. And even if I had seen it, you can't legally restrict access to an easement without proper notice to all affected property owners. I'm pretty sure you need more than just an email that might or might not be received. The bylaws state that electronic communication is sufficient notice. You really should read them more carefully. Now, if you'd like to submit that access request, I'd be happy to bring it to the board. We meet again on the 15th. The 15th, that's 9 days from now. I'll be out of oil in 5. I'm sure you'll figure something out, perhaps space heaters. Although you'll want to check the bylaws on electrical usage. We've had complaints about overloaded circuits affecting neighboring properties. Have a blessed day, Quincy. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in the cold, staring at my phone, absolutely stunned by her audacity. This wasn't just petty HOA overreach. This was deliberately cutting off my access to heating fuel in the middle of winter. I went back inside and started making calls. First, I tried my lawyer, but he was on vacation until the following Monday. His associate, a young guy fresh out of law school, listened to my situation and promised to look into it, but admitted he'd need to research Pennsylvania easement law before giving me solid advice. Next, I called the township office. The woman who answered transferred me to the zoning department, where I got a recorded message saying they were short-staffed due to winter illnesses and to expect delays in response times. I tried 3 other oil companies, hoping someone could make a delivery from the front of the property. The first 2 said their trucks were too large to navigate my narrow driveway and the tight turn required. The third said they could do it, but they were booked solid until the following week due to the increased demand from the cold snap, and their emergency rate would be triple the normal price. By lunchtime, I was furious and running out of options. I cranked my thermostat down to 62 degrees and pulled on a heavy sweater. Then I did something that probably wasn't my finest moment. I drove to Home Depot and bought the heaviest bolt cutters I could find. That night, around midnight, I walked back to the service road gate. The subdivision was quiet, most houses dark except for the occasional porch light. I examined the lock for a long moment, bolt cutters in hand, and then I stopped myself. As satisfying as it would be to cut through that lock, I'd be giving Brenda exactly what she wanted. Proof that I was the troublemaker, the rule breaker, the person who didn't respect HOA authority. I walked back home and spent the next hour researching Pennsylvania property law, easements, and HOA regulations. What I found was encouraging. Brenda had massively overstepped her authority. The service road easement was explicitly mentioned in every property deed in the subdivision. It was a shared right-of-way that couldn't be unilaterally restricted without violating those deed provisions. Even if the HOA had concerns about security, they needed to provide alternative access or get written consent from every property owner affected by the change. More importantly, I discovered that deliberately interfering with someone's access to essential utilities during winter months could potentially qualify as creating a hazardous living condition, especially if it resulted in someone's home losing heat. But here's where things got interesting. As I scrolled through the county property records online, I discovered something I hadn't known before. Brenda's house, just 4 doors down from mine at 223 Oak Ridge Lane, also relied on heating oil. In fact, according to the same property records and some cross-referencing with utility databases, at least 6 houses on our street used oil heat instead of natural gas, and they all relied on that same service road for their deliveries. I checked the HOA bylaws that Brenda loved to reference. There it was in black and white. Any structural changes to common areas, including access roads, required a vote by the full board and at least 30 days' notice to all residents. An emergency meeting with only the board members present didn't cut it, especially since the board was really just Brenda and 2 of her friends who did whatever she told them. Wednesday morning, I drafted a formal letter citing every regulation Brenda had violated, sent copies to every email address listed in the HOA directory, and CC'd my lawyer's office. I kept my tone professional but firm, demanding immediate removal of the gate and warning that I would pursue legal action for any damages resulting from the restricted access. Brenda's response came 3 hours later, and it was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive bureaucracy. She claimed the gate was temporary while the HOA assessed security protocols, insisted she had acted within her authority as president, and suggested that my hostile tone was exactly the kind of behavior that made security measures necessary in the first place. She also made a subtle threat. Any attempt to tamper with or remove HOA property, including the gate, would be treated as vandalism and reported to local law enforcement. Thursday brought another complication. The temperature dropped to 12 degrees overnight, and my oil gauge was visibly lower. I kept the thermostat at 60 and wore layers, but the house was uncomfortably cold. I tried calling the township again and actually got through to someone in the zoning office. The clerk, a tired-sounding man named Dave, listened to my situation and sighed deeply. "Look, you're right about the easement issue. She can't legally block access like that. But here's the problem. Getting the township to force her to remove it requires filing a formal complaint, which goes to the zoning board, which doesn't meet until the last Thursday of the month. You could try getting a judge to issue an emergency order, but that requires filing a petition with the county court, and with the courthouse backlog and the weather situation, you're looking at least a week, maybe 2. So I'm just supposed to freeze. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the official channels are going to take time. Unofficially, this is a civil dispute between you and your HOA. Sometimes these things work themselves out faster when you find creative solutions." His tone suggested he wasn't telling me to cut the lock, but he wasn't exactly not telling me either. I thanked him and hung up, more frustrated than ever. That afternoon, I ran into my neighbor Gerald, who lived at 251 Oak Ridge Lane, 1 house up from me. He was a retired postal worker in his late 60s, a decent guy who mostly kept to himself but always waved hello. "Hey Quincy, how's it going?" he called out as I checked my mailbox. "Been better, Gerald. You heard about the gate situation?" His expression darkened. "Yeah, I got the email from Brenda yesterday. Something about security improvements. I didn't think much of it until my oil company called this morning. I've got a delivery scheduled for next Tuesday, and they wanted to know if the access issue would be resolved by then." "Let me guess. Brenda told you to submit a request 5 days in advance. How'd you know?" "Because she pulled the same thing on me. My delivery was supposed to be Tuesday. I'm running on fumes now." Gerald's eyes widened. "Jesus, Quincy, how low are you?" "Quarter tank, maybe less." "In this cold, I've got a few days at most." "That's insane. She can't just cut off oil access in January. What if someone runs out completely? What if there's an elderly person or someone with health issues? I hadn't thought about that angle. Is there anyone like that on the street? Gerald nodded slowly. Mrs. Patterson at 239, she's 83 with emphysema. She needs to keep her house warm. And the Kowalskis at 219 have a newborn baby, just came home from the hospital last week. This was bigger than just my inconvenience. Brenda's power trip was potentially putting vulnerable people at risk. We should talk to the others, I said. Get everyone together who uses oil heat and needs that service road access. If we present a united front, maybe we can force Brenda to back down. Friday evening, I hosted an impromptu meeting in my living room. Gerald came, along with 4 other neighbors affected by the gate, the Kowalskis, Mrs. Patterson's son who managed her affairs, and 2 other homeowners, including a woman named Susan from 231, who was absolutely livid. She didn't even consult the full neighborhood, Susan said, pacing angrily in front of my fireplace. This affects 9 properties out of 23 on this street, and she just decided on her own that she could block the road. Actually, it's worse than that, I said, pulling up the notes I'd made. I checked the property records. Brenda's house uses oil heat too. She's affected by her own restriction. Everyone stopped and stared at me. Wait, Gerald said slowly. So she's blocking her own oil access. According to the records, yes. 223 Oak Ridge Lane, that's definitely her address, and the heating system is listed as oil furnace. Then how is she planning to get her deliveries? Mrs. Patterson's son asked. That was an excellent question, and I didn't have an answer. Yet. Saturday morning brought the temperature drop everyone had been dreading. I woke up to see my weather app showing 3 degrees outside, with a wind chill of -10. The polar vortex had arrived right on schedule. My house was frigidly cold despite the thermostat being set at 60. I checked my oil tank and felt my stomach drop. The gauge was sitting just above the red line that indicated critical low. I had maybe 2 days of heat left if I was lucky. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket, trying to think through my options. I could leave, go stay at a hotel until this was resolved, but that felt like letting Brenda win. Plus, I'd still have to deal with the problem eventually, and if the pipes froze while I was gone, I'd be looking at thousands in damage. That's when I noticed something interesting through my back window. A Miller's Oil Company truck was slowly making its way down the main street, clearly looking for house numbers. I watched it pause in front of several properties, checking addresses, and then I saw it stop directly in front of Brenda's house. I grabbed my coat and boots, moving quickly to get a better view from my side yard. The driver got out, checked his clipboard, and then walked around to Brenda's driveway. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw Brenda come to her door, speak with the driver for a moment, and then point toward the back of the properties. The driver shook his head and gestured to his truck, clearly explaining that he couldn't access the service road. Brenda's expression went from confident to annoyed to genuinely worried in about 30 seconds. She pulled out her phone, made a call, and had an animated conversation with someone while the driver waited. After about 5 minutes, the driver shrugged, got back in his truck and drove away. Brenda had just been denied her own oil delivery because of the gate she'd installed. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered sitting in my freezing house, remembered Mrs. Patterson and the Kowalskis with their newborn, and any sympathy I had evaporated. This was going to play out exactly as it needed to. Sunday was brutal. The temperature never got above 5 degrees all day, and the overnight low was predicted to hit -2. My oil tank was deep in the red zone. I turned my thermostat down to 58, wore every warm layer I owned, and used my fireplace for the first time since I'd bought the house. Thankfully, I had some firewood left over from the previous owner, enough to keep at least the living room tolerably warm. I spent most of the day feeding the fire and watching through the window, as several neighbors received oil deliveries from companies who could navigate their front driveways. The Kowalskis got their delivery around noon. Mrs. Patterson got hers mid-afternoon. Those of us with difficult access or larger trucks remained out of luck. Around 7 that evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brenda standing on my porch, her face flushed from the cold, wearing an expensive-looking down coat and fur-lined boots. "Quincy, I think we need to talk," she said, her voice lacking its usual imperious tone. I didn't invite her in immediately. "I think we had that conversation earlier this week. You told me to submit a written request and wait for board approval." "Yes, well, circumstances have evolved. May I come in? It's freezing out here." I stepped aside and let her enter. She stood in my entryway, taking in the cold interior of my house, the fire crackling in the living room, my layers of clothing. "I see you're managing the temperature situation," she said carefully. "Barely. I'm down to fumes in my tank, maybe enough for tonight and tomorrow morning. After that, I'm out." She nodded slowly, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. I may have been premature in implementing the gate system without ensuring alternative access arrangements were in place. "You think?" "I'm prepared to authorize temporary access for emergency deliveries while we work out a more permanent security solution." "That's generous of you, Brenda. But here's the thing. You don't have the authority to block that easement in the first place. It's not a privilege you grant. It's a legal right attached to these property deeds. You violated the HOA bylaws by making changes without proper notice and voting procedures. You've potentially created a hazardous situation for multiple residents. And now you want me to be grateful that you'll authorize me to use access that I already legally have." Her expression hardened. "I'm trying to be reasonable here." "No, you're trying to save face because you realized you blocked your own oil delivery too. I saw the miller's truck turn away from your house yesterday. She went very still. That's none of your business. It became my business when you made it everyone's problem. How low is your tank, Brenda? Are you down to your last couple of days too? My heating situation is not your concern." "I have alternative arrangements." "Really? Because I don't see any oil trucks that can get to your property from the front. Your driveway has that weird angle with the retaining wall. Miller's told me their trucks can't navigate it safely. That's why you use the service road access like the rest of us." She stood there silent, and I could see her mind working through scenarios. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold and controlled. "What do you want?" "I want you to remove the gate immediately. I want a formal written apology sent to all affected residents. I want you to acknowledge in writing that you violated HOA procedures, and I want a guarantee that you won't pull anything like this again." "That's not going to happen. I won't undermine my authority as HOA president." "Then I guess we both freeze. Because I'm not playing your games, Brenda. You created this situation. You deal with the consequences." Her face flushed with anger. "You're willing to let your pipes freeze to potentially damage your property just to prove a point, are you?" We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, she turned and walked to the door. Before leaving, she looked back at me. "You're making a mistake, Quincy. The HOA has resources and legal backing. You're just one homeowner." "Actually, I'm one of 9 homeowners on this street who you've affected with your illegal gate, and I've been talking to them. We're organizing a vote to remove you as president. You should check the bylaws on that." I think you'll find we only need a simple majority of residents to call for your removal and a special election." Her face went pale. She left without another word, slamming the door behind her. Monday morning, I woke up to a house that was 50 degrees inside. My furnace had run out of oil sometime during the night. The temperature outside was -1 degree, the coldest reading of the year so far. The meteorologist on the morning news was calling it a historic cold snap, warning people to stay indoors and check on elderly neighbors. I kept the fireplace going, but it only heated the living room. The rest of the house was becoming dangerously cold. I could see my breath in the kitchen. Ice was forming on the inside of the windows in the bedrooms. I called my insurance company to report the situation and ask about coverage for potential frozen pipe damage. The agent told me that if I'd intentionally allowed the house to go without heat, they might deny the claim. I explained the HOA situation, the blocked access, everything. She took detailed notes and said she'd escalate it to a supervisor, but advised me to do whatever necessary to restore heat as soon as possible. Around 10 that morning, Gerald called me. "Quincy, I just drove past the service road. The gate's still there, but I saw something interesting. There's a pickup truck parked near Brenda's house, and I'm pretty sure I saw someone carrying oil cans toward her back door." Oil cans. You know, those 5-gallon emergency cans, like you'd use for a lawn mower or generator. Someone was hand-carrying them from the truck to her house. I felt a surge of anger. So Brenda had a backup plan. She could afford to have someone manually transport heating oil to her house, probably at an astronomical price, while the rest of us suffered under the restrictions she'd imposed. "Thanks for letting me know, Gerald." I sat there for a moment, thinking. Then I made a decision. I grabbed my camera, got in my car, and drove around to where I could see the service road from a different angle. Sure enough, there was a pickup truck, and as I watched, a guy in a heavy coat carried 2 large gas cans through Brenda's side gate toward her backyard, where her oil tank was located. I took several photos, making sure to capture the truck's license plate, the company name on the side, and clear images of the transfer taking place. Then I drove to several of the other affected neighbors and showed them the photos. Susan was outraged. The Kowalskis were furious. Mrs. Patterson's son said he was calling a lawyer. By Monday afternoon, we had drafted a formal complaint to the township and the county, compiled with photographs, copies of deed restrictions showing the easement rights, documentation of the bylaw violations, and statements from all 9 affected households. I also filed a complaint with the Pennsylvania Utility Commission, arguing that Brenda's actions constituted an interference with essential utility access. I also did something else. I called a local television news station that I knew did consumer advocacy stories. I spoke to a producer and explained the situation. HOA president blocks heating oil access during record cold temperatures, but gets her own delivery through a backdoor arrangement while neighbors freeze. They were very interested. Monday night was the coldest I'd ever been in my life. Even with the fireplace going full blast, the living room was barely 60 degrees. The rest of the house was well below 50. I slept on the couch in front of the fire, fully dressed in winter gear, under multiple blankets. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a loud bang from somewhere in the house. I got up and searched with a flashlight, my heart pounding. It took me a few minutes to find the source. A pipe had frozen and burst in the upstairs bathroom. Water was spraying everywhere. I ran to the basement and shut off the main water valve, then went back upstairs to assess the damage. The bathroom was already flooded, water seeping into the hallway. I spent the next hour cleaning up what I could with towels and a bucket, but I knew the damage was done. I took pictures of everything. This was now beyond a simple HOA dispute. Brenda's actions had directly resulted in property damage. Tuesday morning, the news van showed up around 9. The reporter was a woman in her 30s named Jennifer who specialized in consumer protection stories. She interviewed me in front of my house, got footage of the service road gate, and spoke with several other affected neighbors. Then she went to Brenda's house. I watched from a distance as Jennifer knocked on Brenda's door. It took several attempts before Brenda answered, and when she saw the camera, she immediately tried to close the door. Jennifer was professional but persistent, asking questions from the porch. "Mrs. Whitmore, residents are claiming you've illegally blocked access to heating oil deliveries during record low temperatures. Can you comment on that? This is HOA business and not appropriate for media coverage. Please leave my property. We have photographs showing you received an oil delivery yesterday via a private arrangement while other residents were denied access. Did you use HOA authority for personal benefit? I don't have to answer your questions. You're trespassing. We're on your front porch conducting a news interview. Can you explain why you believe the HOA has the right to restrict access to a legally established easement?" Brenda slammed the door. Jennifer turned to the camera and delivered a summary that I knew would not paint Brenda in a positive light. The story aired on the evening news. They'd done their homework, consulting with a real estate attorney who explained on camera that blocking easement access was likely illegal, and that interfering with utility deliveries during winter could potentially rise to the level of creating hazardous living conditions. The segment ended with a shot of my frozen bathroom and a question. How far can HOA authority go? Wednesday morning, everything changed. I woke up to my phone buzzing with text messages. The television story had been picked up by the station's website and was spreading on social media. Local news outlets were calling for interviews. More importantly, I had a voicemail from the township manager's office requesting an immediate meeting. I also had an email from a law firm representing the HOA, threatening legal action if I continued to defame the association with false and misleading statements to the media. I forwarded that email to the reporter, my own lawyer, and every neighbor in the subdivision. At noon, I met with the township manager, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Patricia Caldwell. She had copies of all my complaints, the photographs, the deed restrictions, and the news story pulled up on her computer. "Mr. Zimmerman, I've reviewed your situation. You're correct that the HOA has overstepped its authority. The easement access can't be unilaterally restricted without violating deed provisions. However, removing the gate requires us to issue a formal violation notice to the HOA and give them time to comply." "How much time?" "Standard procedure is 10 business days. I can't wait 10 days. I've already had a pipe burst. If the temperature stays this low, I'll have more." She drummed her fingers on the desk, thinking, "Let me make some calls. The health and safety issue changes things. If we can document that the restriction is creating an immediate hazard, we may be able to expedite this." By Wednesday afternoon, the township had issued an emergency order requiring the HOA to remove the gate within 24 hours or face daily fines of $500. They'd also sent a code enforcement officer to inspect my house and 3 other affected properties. The officer documented the frozen pipe damage at my place and dangerously low temperatures in 2 other homes. Brenda responded by having the HOA's law firm file for an emergency injunction against the township order, claiming the HOA had sovereign authority over common areas. It was now Thursday, exactly 1 week since my original oil delivery had been blocked. The temperature had finally started to rise, reaching a comparatively balmy 15 degrees. My house was still without heat, and I was living in front of my fireplace like a medieval peasant. Then something happened that I didn't expect. The HOA's law firm withdrew from the case. I later learned that one of the junior attorneys had researched the situation and informed the senior partners that not only was the HOA's position legally indefensible, but Brenda had apparently misrepresented the facts when hiring them, claiming the gate was approved by a proper board vote with full resident notice. Without legal representation and facing mounting fines, the HOA board minus Brenda held an emergency meeting and voted to remove the gate immediately. By Thursday evening, the chain link barrier was gone. I called Miller's Oil Company. Carol answered, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "Mr. Zimmerman, I heard about your situation on the news. We've had you marked as priority emergency. How soon do you need delivery?" "Immediately. I've been without heat since Monday." "We can get someone there first thing Friday morning, 6 a.m. No charge for the emergency timing." "Carol, I could kiss you. Just doing what's right. Nobody should freeze because of HOA politics." Friday morning, I woke up to the sound of the oil truck backing down the service road. I met the driver at my tank, and watching that oil flow was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. He filled me all the way to maximum capacity, and within an hour, my furnace was running and warm air was flowing through my house again. But the story wasn't over yet. Friday afternoon, I received a certified letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a notice that a group of homeowners in the subdivision, led by Susan and Gerald, had filed a lawsuit against Brenda Whitmore personally for damages resulting from her actions. They were also moving forward with the petition to remove her as HOA president. The special election was held the following Tuesday. Out of 23 households in our section of Oak Ridge Estates, 21 voted. Brenda was removed from her position by a vote of 19-2. The only votes in her favor were from her 2 board cronies, who also resigned shortly after. Gerald was elected as the new interim president, with Susan as vice president. Their first act was to commission a formal review of HOA procedures to prevent future abuses of authority. The damage to my house cost $3,200 to repair. The burst pipe had damaged not just the bathroom, but also the ceiling below it in my dining room. My insurance company, after reviewing all the documentation, covered the claim, and then indicated they were pursuing subrogation against Brenda personally. The Kowalskis had also experienced pipe damage, though less severe than mine. Mrs. Patterson's heating bill had tripled because her ancient furnace had to work overtime in the extreme cold, struggling with an older tank that had gotten too low. 2 other households reported various cold-related damage. By the end of January, Brenda was facing 5 separate lawsuits from residents. The total damages claimed exceeded $40,000. The HOA's insurance company denied coverage, arguing that Brenda had acted outside her authority and contrary to established bylaws. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she'd had to hire a lawyer at her own expense and was frantically trying to negotiate settlements. In February, the temperature moderated to more normal winter levels, and life in the subdivision gradually returned to normal. The service road remained accessible. Gerald and Susan implemented a simple system where delivery drivers could text a dedicated HOA phone number if they needed access after hours or on weekends, and someone would be available to ensure everything went smoothly. Brenda put her house up for sale in March. I saw her a few times while she was preparing to move, but we never spoke. She looked diminished somehow, smaller than before, the righteous certainty that had driven her completely gone. The civil suits were settled out of court in April. I received a check for my full damages plus legal fees. The terms of the settlement included a confidentiality clause, but I can say that Brenda's homeowner's insurance ultimately covered most of the payouts, though her premiums apparently skyrocketed as a result. She moved out in May, and a young couple with a toddler moved in by June. They were friendly and reasonable, and they attended HOA meetings without trying to turn them into personal fiefdoms. Looking back on the whole situation, I sometimes wonder if I handled it the right way. Should I have been more aggressive earlier? Should I have just cut the lock and dealt with the consequences? Should I have tried harder to negotiate with Brenda before things escalated? But then I remember that Brenda was the one who created the crisis. She was the one who decided that her authority mattered more than people's access to heat in the middle of winter. She was the one who arranged her own backdoor oil delivery while enforcing restrictions on everyone else. I've thought a lot about that moment when I realized she was going to run out of heat too, when I understood that her own gate was going to cause her the same suffering she was inflicting on the rest of us. I won't pretend I didn't feel a certain satisfaction watching her try to deal with the consequences of her own actions. Some people might say that's petty or vindictive. Maybe it is. But there's something to be said for letting natural consequences play out, especially when someone has been warned repeatedly that their actions will backfire. The whole experience taught me several things. First, always read your property deed and understand your actual legal rights versus what an HOA claims you can or cannot do. Second, document everything because you never know when you'll need evidence of wrongdoing. Third, people with unchecked authority will almost always abuse it, and the only remedy is to check that authority firmly and publicly. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply stepping back and watching someone experience the full results of their own decisions. The polar vortex of that January became something of a legend in Chester Springs. People still talk about the coldest week in 30 years, about the HOA president who blocked her own oil delivery, about the news story that went viral. Our little subdivision made regional news, became a cautionary tale in HOA governance forums, and apparently is now used as an example in some property law classes about easement rights and abuse of authority. Gerald turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He ran meetings efficiently, consulted with residents before making decisions, and generally treated the position as a service role rather than a power position. The subdivision became a genuinely pleasant place to live. As for me, I invested in a backup propane heater and made sure to never let my oil tank drop below half full during winter months. I also became much more active in HOA affairs, not because I enjoyed meetings or wanted authority, but because I'd learned the hard way that ignoring HOA politics can have real and immediate consequences. I still see that service road every day when I look out my back window. No gate, no barriers, just clear access the way it was always meant to be. Sometimes the oil trucks rumble through early in the morning, and I feel a small sense of satisfaction knowing that particular battle was won. The whole thing could have turned out very differently. If the temperatures had stayed low longer, if more pipes had burst, if someone elderly or vulnerable had been seriously harmed by the cold, we might be talking about criminal charges rather than civil lawsuits. Brenda came closer than she probably realizes to facing genuinely serious legal consequences. As it stands, she paid a steep price for her overreach. Her reputation destroyed, her finances damaged, forced to leave a home she'd lived in for years, facing years of increased insurance premiums and the permanent stain of being that HOA president who made everyone freeze. I sometimes wonder if she learned anything from the experience, if she ever reflected on how her need for control and authority led directly to her own downfall. But honestly, I don't think about her much anymore. She's someone else's problem now, living somewhere else, hopefully having learned to be a more considerate neighbor. The spring after what everyone started calling the gate incident brought renewal to the neighborhood in more ways than one. Gardens bloomed, kids played in yards, and there was a sense of community that I don't think had existed before. Shared adversity had brought people together. We'd gone from being a collection of isolated households to an actual neighborhood that looked out for each other. Susan organized a summer block party in July, the first in the subdivision's history. Nearly every household participated, bringing food and drinks and stories. Someone brought up the gate incident, and we all laughed about it, the kind of laughter that comes from surviving something difficult together. Gerald gave a mock-serious speech about the importance of not blocking utility access, which got applause and cheers. Even the new residents who'd moved into Brenda's old house participated, though they seemed a bit confused about what exactly had happened. I spent some time that summer talking to a local reporter who was doing a longer feature story about HOA overreach in Pennsylvania. The gate incident was one of several examples she was documenting. Apparently, HOA abuse was becoming a more recognized problem, with state legislators considering new laws to limit HOA authority and provide homeowners with better remedies when associations stepped out of bounds. My story, along with others, helped inform that proposed legislation. A bill was introduced in the Pennsylvania House that would explicitly protect utility access rights and create penalties for HOAs that interfered with essential services. As of the time I'm telling this story, that bill is still working its way through committees, but advocates are optimistic it will eventually pass. It's strange to think that my experience that cold January week might actually help change the law, might prevent other homeowners from going through similar situations. If something positive comes from that whole miserable experience, that would be it. I also learned to appreciate my neighbors in a way I hadn't before. Gerald, who checked on me multiple times during the coldest days and offered me a space heater from his garage. Susan, who researched legal precedents and helped organize the group response. The Kowalskis, who despite having a newborn to care for, still took time to participate in meetings and sign petitions. Even Mrs. Patterson, who at 83 was sharper and more engaged than many people half her age. These were people I'd waved to for years without really knowing. The crisis brought us together, created relationships that extended beyond casual neighborliness into genuine friendship and community support. By the time autumn arrived and temperatures started dropping again, there was a collective wariness in the neighborhood. We'd all been through the worst cold snap in recent memory, had all experienced either directly or indirectly the consequences of that blocked access. When the first oil delivery of the new season arrived in October, I noticed several neighbors watching from their windows or standing in their yards, a visible reminder that we were all paying attention now. The delivery went smoothly, of course. The service road remained clear. The process worked exactly as it was supposed to work. But there was a heightened awareness now, a collective determination to never let something like that happen again. Gerald established a new tradition of monthly neighborhood meetings, separate from the formal HOA meetings, where people could raise concerns or share information in a more casual setting. Attendance was voluntary but consistently strong. People wanted to stay informed, wanted to have a voice, wanted to ensure that the HOA served the neighborhood rather than controlled it. The new couple who'd bought Brenda's house, Jason and Emily, became part of this new community dynamic. They were young professionals who worked from home and had a 3-year-old daughter named Sophie. Emily once asked me about the previous owner, clearly having heard rumors but not knowing details. I gave her the abbreviated version: HOA president who overstepped her authority and faced consequences. I didn't dwell on it or speak badly about Brenda. Water under the bridge, I said, and we were all glad to have new neighbors who seemed interested in being part of the community. Emily seemed satisfied with that explanation, though I caught her giving the service road thoughtful looks sometimes, clearly putting together pieces of the story. As winter approached again, I made sure my oil tank was topped off early. I wasn't taking any chances, even though rationally I knew the gate wasn't coming back and Gerald would never pull something like Brenda had. But trauma leaves marks, and that week of freezing in my own home, of watching my pipes burst and my property get damaged, while Brenda smugly enforced her own illegal restriction, had left me with a heightened caution about winter heating. I also invested in a whole house generator system that could run on propane, a significant expense but one that gave me peace of mind. If nothing else, I'd never be completely without heat again. The first serious cold snap of the new winter came in late December, temperatures dropping into the teens. I woke up that first cold morning with a moment of anxiety, an echo of the previous year, before remembering that everything was fine. My tank was full. The service road was clear. The HOA was functioning properly. I was safe and warm. That contrast between the anxiety of the memory and the security of the present really drove home how much had changed in a year. Brenda's actions had been more than just an inconvenience or a property damage issue. They'd created a sense of vulnerability and insecurity that extended beyond the immediate crisis. But we'd overcome it, both individually and as a community. We'd stood up to abuse of authority, we'd supported each other through difficulty, and we'd implemented changes to prevent similar problems in the future. Those are real accomplishments, worth more than any single legal victory or settlement check. As I write this now, it's been over a year since the gate incident. Life in Oak Ridge Estates has settled into a comfortable routine. The HOA handles basic maintenance and common area upkeep without drama or overreach. Neighbors know each other and look out for each other. The service road remains accessible. Deliveries happen without incident, and winter heating is reliable and uninterrupted. Sometimes I drive past subdivisions in other parts of Chester Springs or neighboring townships, and I see the signs. HOA community or homeowners association rules apply. And I wonder what's happening behind those signs, whether residents are dealing with their own Brendas, their own petty tyrants who confuse authority with service and community with control. I hope they're not. I hope most HOAs function reasonably, and most HOA board members understand their role as facilitators rather than rulers. But I know, from my own experience and from the stories that continue to emerge, that HOA abuse is more common than it should be. If my story helps even one person understand their rights, recognize when an HOA is overstepping, and take action to protect themselves and their neighbors, then everything I went through will have been worthwhile. The gate is gone. Brenda is gone. The damage is repaired. Life goes on. But I'll never forget that January week. The coldest temperatures in 30 years, sitting in front of my fireplace watching my breath fog in my own living room while 4 doors down. Brenda Whitmore experienced the exact same consequences of her own illegal restriction. There's a certain poetry to that, a natural justice that no court could have delivered more perfectly. She set the trap, she created the crisis, and she fell victim to her own machinations. Sometimes the best response to tyranny isn't direct confrontation, but simply ensuring that tyrants experience the full weight of their own policies. Brenda wanted to control access through the service road. Fine. Everyone, including her, would face that controlled access. She wanted to require 5-day advance notice for deliveries. Fine. She could follow her own rules. The gate blocked her access as effectively as it blocked mine. The cold affected her house as much as it affected mine. The only difference was that I'd prepared for the long game while she'd only thought about immediate control. In the end, that made all the difference. I was willing to be uncomfortable, to endure cold and inconvenience, because I knew the principle at stake was more important than temporary discomfort. Brenda wasn't willing to endure those same conditions, couldn't follow through on her own policies, and had to arrange backdoor solutions that ultimately exposed her hypocrisy. The television news story, the photographs of her special oil delivery while other residents froze, the revelation that she'd exempted herself from the restrictions she imposed on others, that was what really destroyed her authority and her position. Not the legal violations, not the bylaw breaches, but the naked self-interest and hypocrisy that those photographs revealed. People can forgive mistakes. They can forgive overzealous enforcement or even minor abuses of authority if there's accountability and apology. But they can't forgive being held to standards that the person in power refuses to follow themselves. That's a betrayal of the fundamental social contract that makes any community function. Brenda betrayed that contract. She demanded sacrifice from others while exempting herself. And the community responded by removing her from any position where she could wield authority. It's now been long enough that I can reflect on the whole experience with some emotional distance. At the time, I was angry and frustrated and cold and worried about my property. But looking back, I can see the incident as a kind of crucible that tested and ultimately strengthened our community. We learned that we had power collectively that we lacked individually. We learned that abuse of authority doesn't go unchallenged if people are willing to stand together. We learned that systems have remedies if you're persistent enough to pursue them. We also learned, perhaps most importantly, that community matters, that neighbors matter, that the connections between the people who live on your street can make the difference between suffering alone and standing together. I'm grateful for that lesson, even though I wish I could have learned it without freezing for a week and dealing with burst pipes. The service road behind my property is quiet now as I look out my window. It's early January again, almost exactly a year since the gate appeared. The temperature is cold but manageable, around 25 degrees. My oil tank is 3/4 full. My backup generator sits ready if needed. My neighbors are warm and safe in their homes. Everything is as it should be, as it always should have been, as it will continue to be now that we've all learned to protect what matters. The gate is gone, and it's not coming back. That's a victory worth celebrating, even now, even after all this time. Some victories are immediate and obvious. Others take time to appreciate fully. This was one of the latter, a victory measured not just in the removal of a physical barrier, but in the creation of a community that knows its rights and will defend them, that looks out for its members and holds its leaders accountable, that values service over authority and cooperation over control. That's the real story of the gate incident. Not just about one HOA president who overreached and faced consequences, but about a community that found itself through adversity and emerged stronger for it. And on cold January mornings like this one, when I'm warm and comfortable in my home with reliable heat and clear access and good neighbors, I appreciate that strength more than I can easily express. The polar vortex came and went. The record lows were set and will eventually be broken. But the community we built during that crisis, the relationships we forged and the principles we established, those will last much longer than any weather pattern. That's my story. That's what happened when Brenda Whitmore blocked my oil access during the coldest week in 30 years. It's a story about winter and cold and heat and authority and community and justice and consequences. Most of all, it's a story about what happens when someone in power forgets that their authority exists to serve, not to control, and what happens when a community decides that enough is enough. The gate is gone. Brenda is gone. But the lessons remain, and the community we built remains, and the principle that no one should freeze because of someone else's ego remains. And that, in the end, is all that really matters.